The stagecoach lurched hard to the left when the first shot took the near-lead horse through the shoulder, and Lavinia Slater had just enough time to grab the leather strap above her head before the whole world tipped sideways and the Dodge City Mail coach rolled twice down the frozen embankment and came to rest on its side in a spray of splintered wood and flying snow. For a moment there was only ringing silence, broken by the screaming of the injured horses and the low moan of a man somewhere beneath her. She was hanging half out of the shattered window, her satchel still clutched against her chest, the strap wound so tight around her wrist that her hand had gone numb. Below her, wedged against what had been the floor and was now the wall, lay old Mrs. Petrie, the banker's wife from Larned, her bonnet crushed and her leg bent in a way that made Lavinia's stomach turn. "Don't move," Lavinia said, though her own voice shook. "Don't move, I have you." Outside, gunfire cracked again, 3 shots closed together, and a man shouted something she could not make out over the wind. She twisted around and saw, through the broken door above her, 4 riders coming down through the snow-dusted grass with pistols drawn, and on the driver's box, Tom Rourke, the shotgun guard, was down on one knee with blood already darkening the front of his coat, still trying to lever a shell into his Winchester. Lavinia had ridden this route 11 times since October, carrying her books and her letters out to the ranch families who lived too far from any town to buy a newspaper or borrow a novel, and never once had she seen a road agent close enough to know his face. Now she was close enough to count the buttons on the nearest man's coat, and all she could think, absurdly, foolishly, was that she still had a crate of primers for the Whitfield children under the seat, and if this coach burned they would go up with everything else. "Hold on to me," she told Mrs. Petrie, bracing her boots against the door frame. "We are going to get you out of here." A horse screamed. Another shot came, and this one was answered from somewhere off to the north. A different gun, a heavier report, and Lavinia looked up in time to see a rider come off the low ridge at a dead run, coat flapping, hat gone, firing from the saddle with a steadiness that seemed almost unnatural amid all that chaos. He put 2 of the road agents down before they even understood there was a second gun in the fight. The third wheeled his horse and fled north along the ambush line, and the fourth, the one who had been closest to Tom Rourke, turned his pistol on the newcomer instead of finishing the guard. The rider came off his horse before it had even fully stopped, hit the ground rolling, and came up with his revolver already leveled. He did not miss. The last road agent folded backward off his mount and did not move again. Then and only then did the man turn toward the wrecked coach, and Lavinia got her first look at Elijah Trask, a broad-shouldered man perhaps 30 years old, dark-haired, unshaven, with a Deputy United States Marshal's badge pinned crooked on a coat that had seen better winters, and eyes that went immediately, instinctively, to the overturned coach and the sounds of the living still trapped inside it. "Anybody alive in there?" he called, already moving. "2 of us and Mrs. Petrie is hurt bad," Lavinia called back. "Her leg is broken, I think, and there is a child, the Ashworth boy. He is not answering me." Elijah Trask swung up onto the coach's exposed side, found the door that faced skyward and wrenched it open with both hands, the muscles in his forearms standing out with the effort. "Pass her up. Careful of that leg, ma'am, I've got her. Easy now, easy." Between the 2 of them they worked Mrs. Petrie free, and Lavinia climbed half out onto the coach's flank to help ease her down to the snow, and then went back inside for the boy, who turned out to be only stunned, a lump rising on his forehead, crying now, which was, Lavinia thought with relief, a very good sign in a child. It was Trask who reached Tom Rourke last, because Tom Rourke was the one who could wait the least and somehow, in the terrible arithmetic of it, was tended to first in every way that mattered except order of hands. The guard had been shot twice, once through the meat of his side and once, worse, low in his belly, and he was gray and sweating despite the cold, and he knew, the way dying men often seem to know, exactly how much time he did not have. "Marshal," Tom Rourke said when Trask knelt over him and pressed a folded coat hard against the wound. "Marshal, listen to me now. Don't talk, Tom, I'll get you back to Dodge. Listen to me. Rourke's hand found Trask's wrist with surprising strength. "There's a woman on this coach, the librarian, Miss Slater. She's carrying a packet for Widow Boone. Ledger pages. Get it to the real marshal's office. Not to Dunbar, you hear me? Not to Dunbar." Lavinia had come up beside them without either man noticing, and she went cold all through her chest at the sound of her own name in a dying man's mouth. "Tom, I'm right here," she said, kneeling in the snow beside him, taking his other hand. "I have it. I have the packet. It's safe. It never left me." Tom Rourke's eyes found her face, and something in them eased just slightly. "Good girl, good girl. Get it to Marshal Whitcomb in Topeka if you have to ride there yourself. Not Dunbar. He's bought and paid same as the men that shot me." His breath rattled. "They knew we had it. Somebody told them we had it." "Who, Tom? Who told them?" But Tom Rourke's grip had already begun to loosen, and by the time Elijah Trask pressed 2 fingers to the man's throat and shook his head once, slow and grim, the wind had picked up out of the northwest and begun, in earnest, to drive the first hard flakes of what would become, before the week was out, the worst blizzard Ford County had seen in 6 winters. They buried nothing that day. There was no time and no ground soft enough. Elijah Trask rode double with the injured missus. Petrie held steady before him back toward Dodge City, while Lavinia drove the surviving team, wrecked traces cut free and reharnessed by main strength and stubbornness, with the Ashworth boy wrapped in every blanket she owned in the wagon bed behind her, and Tom Rourke's body laid out beside him under a canvas tarp, because she would not leave him for the wolves. It was full dark and bitter cold by the time they raised the lights of the town, and Lavinia Slater's hands were so frozen to the reins that Elijah Trask had to peel her fingers loose himself outside the doctor's office. And for one strange, suspended moment, with the snow coming down around them both and her breath fogging white in the lantern light, neither of them said anything at all. He simply held her hands between his own, chafing warmth back into them, and she let him, too exhausted and too grateful to think of propriety. "You did well today," he said finally, "better than most men would have." "Tom Rourke did the dying," she said. "I only did the driving." "You did more than that, and you know it." He studied her for a long moment, snow catching in his dark hair. "You still have that packet he spoke of." Her hand went, without thinking, to the satchel she had not once set down all day. "I do. Keep it close," Elijah Trask said quietly. "And keep quiet about it if you can. I don't know yet who to trust in this town, and neither should you." She should have listened to him. She meant to. But grief and cold and 12 hours of terror had worn her judgment thin, and when Marshal Hollis Dunbar himself came striding out of his office an hour later, all smiles and sympathy, asking with apparent concern whether the packet Tom Rourke died protecting had survived the wreck, Lavinia Slater, still shaking, still half in shock, told him the truth. It was the last mistake of its kind she would ever make, though she did not yet know it would nearly cost her everything. By morning, the packet was gone from her satchel, and by noon, Marshal Hollis Dunbar had sworn out a warrant for her arrest, charging Lavinia Slater with conspiracy in the robbery and murder of Thomas Rourke, and offering, on behalf of what he called the Ford County Stockmen's Protective Association, a reward of $500 for her capture. Elijah Trask read the wanted notice pinned to the board outside the marshal's office 3 times before he let himself believe it said what it said, and each time his stomach turned a little further. He had ridden 2 hard days out from Dodge City chasing rumors of rustled cattle crossing into the Cimarron country, and had come back to find the whole town talking of nothing else. The librarian, the one who'd fought to save Mrs. Petrie and the Ashworth boy with her own 2 hands. Wanted for murder, and worse, wanted dead or alive, and there were men in this town. He knew, hard men just off the trail with empty pockets and no particular love of the law, who would not trouble themselves over much about which half of that phrase they collected on. He found Dunbar in the back room of the marshal's office, boots up on the stove rail, a cigar going, looking entirely too pleased with himself for a man whose deputy had died 2 nights past. "Trask, good you're back. I need men riding out after that Slater woman before she gets clear across the state line." "On what evidence, Marshal? I was there. I saw her fight those road agents same as I did." Dunbar waved the cigar. "Rourke's dying words for one. Said she was carrying something for the outlaws, plain as day. Half a dozen folks heard it." "He said she was carrying evidence for you," Elijah said carefully, "and told her not to give it to you." The room went very still. Dunbar's smile did not move, but something behind his eyes went flat and cold. "Careful, deputy. That sounds mighty close to accusing a sworn officer of the law." "I'm not accusing anybody of anything. I'm asking on what evidence you swore a murder warrant against a woman I watched pull a child out of a wrecked coach with her bare hands. The packet's gone missing from her satchel, Trask, and gone missing awful convenient, don't you think, right after she told me she had it. And there's a witness now, come forward this morning. Amos Prout, driver on the westbound, says he saw her meet with one of the road agents a week back at the Cimarron crossing, passing him papers." Dunbar leaned forward. "I don't like it any better than you do, but a lawman doesn't get the luxury of liking or disliking the law he's sworn to serve. There's a warrant. There's a reward posted by decent men who lost cattle and money to whoever's behind this rustling business, and they want her found. You're the best tracker wears a badge in this county. So you'll ride, or I'll find a man who will, and you can explain to the territorial marshal in Topeka why you refused a lawful order." Elijah Trask had worn a badge for 6 years, first as a town constable in a played-out mining camp in Colorado. Then, after the war debts and drought drove half that camp into the ground, as a deputy for the federal court out of Topeka, riding a circuit that stretched from Dodge City to the Cimarron and back twice a year. He had arrested men he liked and let go men he despised, because that, he had always believed, was the whole difference between justice and mere vengeance. That the law did not care whom you loved or whom you hated, only what could be proven. He had never in 6 years been asked to hunt a woman he had watched risk her life to save a stranger's child, on the word of a driver he had never met and a marshal he was beginning, with a slow, cold certainty, not to trust at all. "I'll ride," he said finally. Dunbar's smile came back, satisfied. "Good man. Bring her in and that 500's yours same as anybody's. I don't want your reward, Marshal. Suit yourself. Somebody'll collect it. Might as well be you, and might as well be somebody who won't put a bullet in her before she can answer for herself." Dunbar's eyes glittered. "There's men in this town who'd rather she never made it to trial at all, Trask. You understand me? A woman who knows things, riding around loose in a blizzard season, with folks out there who'd sleep easier if the whole business just went quiet and stayed quiet." It was, Elijah understood grimly, the truest thing Dunbar had said yet, and the reason, more than any warrant, more than any reward, that he saddled his horse within the hour and rode west out of Dodge City into a sky already bruising gray at the edges with the first breath of the storm to come. Lavinia Slater had not run far, because she had nowhere far to run to, and because running, she had decided somewhere on the cold ride out of town, would only make her look guiltier of a thing she had not done. She had gone the one place she trusted absolutely. The Boone Ranch, 22 miles southwest along the Cimarron Trail, where her own book wagon still sat with a cracked axle waiting on repair, and where Edith Boone, newly widowed these 3 months past when her husband Silas had been found dead beneath his own horse in a ravine everyone called an accident, and no one quite believed, had become the closest thing to a friend Lavinia had made in 2 years of riding this lonesome circuit. Edith Boone did not ask many questions when Lavinia arrived on a borrowed horse at dusk, half frozen, with a warrant for murder somewhere behind her on the wind. She simply pulled her inside, put a blanket around her shoulders, and set coffee to boil. "They took the packet from my satchel while I slept at the boarding house," Lavinia said, once she had stopped shaking enough to speak clearly. "Dunbar's man, I think, though I never saw who. And now Dunbar's saying I gave it to the outlaws, that I'm part of whatever it was Tom Rourke died trying to stop." Edith Boone's face, already thin and worn from grief, went harder still. It was my Silas's ledger pages, wasn't it? The ones I gave you, torn from the Triple Bar Cattle Company's brand book. You said Silas found them among the papers of a man who used to keep books for the syndicate before he disappeared. Vanished clean off the earth, that man did, right after he quit them. Edith Boone poured the coffee with a hand that trembled only slightly. Those pages showed the running iron marks, Lavinia. Showed how they'd been altering the /B and the rocking chair brands into their own triple bar, one stroke at a time, buying up debt paper on half the small outfits in this county, and then just walking off with their herds under cover of a legal-looking bill of sale nobody thought to read close. Silas found it out, and 3 weeks later he was dead under his own horse in a ravine he'd ridden 100 times sober and drunk both, and never once fallen. And now Tom Rourke is dead too, and I am wanted for both of their deaths, and the only proof that any of it is true has vanished into Holly's Dunbar's desk drawer. Lavinia pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. I did not do this thing, Edith. I did not. I know you didn't, child. But knowing and proving are two different animals, and the second one is going to need more than my say-so and yours. It was nearly midnight, with the first true gusts of the coming storm already rattling the shutters, when a rider came up hard out of the dark, and Edith Boone's old hound set to baying before either woman heard the hoofbeats at all. Lavinia was on her feet with Silas Boone's old shotgun in her hands before Edith could stop her, and it was only the sound of the voice through the door, low and steady, that made her lower it. Miss Slater, it's Elijah Trask. I'm alone, and I mean you no harm, but I have to ask you to open this door. She opened it a crack, shotgun still half raised, snow already blowing in sideways around his boots. I have a warrant, he said before she could speak. I won't lie to you about that. Marshal Dunbar swore it this morning, murder and conspiracy both, and there's $500 posted for whoever brings you in. He held up both empty hands, slow and deliberate, snow catching in his eyelashes. I'm not here for the money, Miss Slater. I'm here because I don't believe a word of it, and because if I don't come get you first, there are men riding this county tonight who won't much care whether you're dead or alive when they collect. And if I refuse to go with you, then I reckon we'll both freeze out here arguing about it, because I am not leaving without you, and I am not dragging you anywhere against your will either. He managed, despite everything, something close to a tired smile. I watched you pull a boy out of a wrecked coach with your own 2 hands 2 days back, ma'am. I don't believe you're capable of the thing they're saying you did. But I can't prove that to a judge with my own gut feeling, and neither can you, not hiding out here in a blizzard. I mean to see you cleared of this properly in front of the circuit court, if you'll let me help you do it. Edith Boone, standing just behind Lavinia with a lamp raised, spoke up before Lavinia could answer. You'd best come in out of that wind before you decide anything, Marshal, or there won't be a warrant left to worry about. Only 2 frozen fools on my porch. He came in, and Lavinia set the shotgun down, though not without a long, searching look at his face, trying to read there whatever truth might be hiding behind that badge. Why? She asked him plainly, once he had thought enough by Edith's stove to speak without his teeth chattering. Would a deputy marshal turn down $500 and his own marshal's order to chase after a woman he barely knows? Elijah Trask considered the question a long moment, turning his coffee cup slowly in his hands. Because I've worn this badge 6 years now, Miss Slater, and I've learned there's a difference between what's lawful and what's just, and it isn't a small difference, and it isn't one a man can pretend not to see once he's seen it clear. Tom Rourke died telling you not to trust Dunbar with whatever you were carrying. I mean to find out why, and I mean to see the right person answer for his killing, whoever that turns out to be. If that happens to be you, I'll bring you in myself and stand in the courtroom while they try you fair. But I don't believe it will be you, and until I know different, I am not going to be the man who collects a bounty on an innocent woman's neck. It was, Lavinia thought, looking at his tired, snow-reddened, earnest face, the first entirely honest thing anyone in a position of authority had said to her since the ambush, and something in her chest, tight and frightened for 2 days now, loosened just slightly for the first time. "All right, Deputy Trask," she said. "Where do we start?" Edith Boone, watching the two of them across her kitchen table with the particular sharpness of a woman who had buried a husband, and had no patience left for pretending not to see what was plainly in front of her, set down the coffee pot with a decided thump. "You'll start," she said, "by neither of you doing anything foolish tonight, because there is a blizzard coming down off the Cimarron that will kill you both a good deal faster and a good deal more certain than Holly's Dunbar's warrant. You'll stay under my roof till it breaks, and you'll think on what comes after with clear heads, not frozen ones." "Ma'am," Elijah said, "I'm grateful, but a man riding with a woman he's arrested, unmarried, under one roof for however many days this storm keeps up, that's the kind of talk that could do Miss Slater more harm in a courtroom than the warrant already has, if word gets back to Dodge City twisted the way things twist in a cattle town." "Then let it be known you're married," Edith Boone said, matter of fact as pouring coffee. "Nobody out here but me and my hired man to know different, and I'll say nothing if you won't. A wife can't hardly be called a fugitive from her own husband's custody, can she? And a marshal escorting his wife home raises no eyebrows at all. Simplest solution I know of, and it costs you nothing but a little pretending." Lavinia felt her face go warm despite the cold still in her bones, and did not dare look at Elijah Trask, though she was sharply, uncomfortably aware of him sitting not 3 feet away. "I couldn't ask that of you," she said finally to Edith, though the words felt strange in her mouth, half regret and half relief that she had said them at all. "A pretense like that built on a lie just to smooth our road, it isn't right, Edith. Not to Elijah and not to whatever might come after once this is behind us. If I'm ever a wife to any man, I'd rather it be because he chose it plain in daylight, knowing exactly who I am, than because a blizzard and a warrant made it convenient." She risked a glance at him then and found him already looking at her, something careful and considering in his expression. "I'll not pretend to something I haven't earned," Elijah said quietly. "If that day ever comes, Miss Slater, I'd want it to come honest, same as you would. For now, I reckon we'll just have to trust Mrs. Boone to keep her own counsel, and trust each other to behave like the decent people we are, married or not." Edith Boone snorted, not unkindly. "Suit yourselves, the pair of you, stubborn as spring mud. I'll make up the loft for you, Marshal, and Lavinia can have my Ruthie's old room. But mark me, that storm is not finished with this county, and before it is, you'll both wish you'd taken the easier road on more than one thing." She was, though none of them yet knew it, entirely correct. The blizzard held the Boone ranch in its fist for 2 full days, howling white across the flat land until the horizon disappeared entirely, and even the well 50 feet from the door became an expedition of rope and courage. Lavinia spent the time going carefully back over every detail she could recall of Tom Rourke's last words, of the packet's contents, of the 6 weeks she had known Edith and Silas Boone before his death, while Elijah rode the fence lines with Edith's hired man, Joseph Otero, checking on stock too stubborn or too slow to have found shelter on their own, and thought his own long thoughts about Marshal Holly's Dunbar, and the strange coincidence of a witness named Amos Prout appearing so conveniently on the very morning after the packet vanished. It was on the second night, with the wind still shrieking against the shutters and the fire burned down to embers, that the first real trouble of the storm arrived at Edith Boone's door in the shape of Caleb Whitfield, half frozen on a mule that could barely stand, pounding for help with a fist gone nearly numb. "My Nell," he gasped, when Edith dragged him inside and Lavinia pressed a cup of hot broth into his shaking hands. "She's took the diphtheria bad, Mrs. Boone, throat's closing up on her, and the doctor's own supply of the antitoxin serum is sitting in his office in Dodge City doing my girl no good at all with this storm between us. I don't know what else to do." I've 6 children and I'm about to lose the littlest of them." Lavinia was already on her feet before Caleb Whitfield finished speaking, her mind running fast and clear despite the lateness of the hour. "Dr. Meacham keeps his serum locked in that cabinet by the window. I've seen it. I deliver his medical journals to him every month. If someone can get to Dodge City and back—" "Nobody's getting to Dodge City and back in this," Edith said flatly. "It's 22 miles of open ground with no shelter and no trail you could follow by sight, not in this wind." "I know the way blind," Lavinia said. "I've ridden it in every season for 2 years. I know where the coulee runs that breaks the wind. I know where the Cimarron bends close enough to follow the sound of the water even when you can't see your own hand. I have done it before in bad weather, Edith, though never this bad." "You are not riding into that alone," Elijah said, already reaching for his coat. "I did not ask you to come. I'm coming anyway." A wanted woman riding alone toward the very town that swore out her warrant is a fine way to get herself shot before she ever reaches the doctor's door, storm or no storm. "I'll ride with you, and that is not a request, Miss Slater. That is the one thing in this whole business I am not willing to argue about." She looked at him a long moment, snowlight and firelight both catching in his eyes, and found, to her own surprise, that she was glad of it. "Then we had best not waste any more of the night talking about it." Caleb Whitfield's mule was in no condition to go anywhere. Edith Boone gave them her 2 best horses, sturdy range stock accustomed to Kansas winters, and packed what medicine of her own she had, a jar of mustard plaster and a tin of camphor, though both women knew it would do little enough against a throat closing from diphtheria. Joseph Otero rigged a rope line between the 2 saddles, so as you don't lose each other if the white gets too thick to see your own horse's ears. And by the time they rode out into the full teeth of the storm, it was already past midnight, with the temperature falling and the wind screaming steady out of the northwest at a pitch that made speech nearly impossible. Lavinia led. She had told the truth about knowing the road, though knowing became, within the first mile, a matter more of memory and instinct than of any landmark she could actually see. For the world beyond 10 feet in any direction was simply gone, replaced by a churning gray-white nothing that stung the eyes and froze the breath in her scarf into a stiff mask of ice. They found the coulee by the change in the wind's voice, a slight lessening of its howl as the land dipped and gave them momentary shelter, and Lavinia allowed herself a single shaking breath of relief before pressing on. Twice her horse balked at drifts that had swallowed the trail entirely, and twice Elijah's steady voice came through the wind at her shoulder, not panicked, simply present, walking his horse up alongside hers to break trail through the worst of it. "How much farther to the river bend?" he called, close enough now that she could see the ice forming on his eyebrows. 3 miles, maybe less if I've kept us straight," she had to shout to be heard at all. "I can't see the sun. I can't see a single tree I recognize. I am going entirely on feel, Elijah. I want you to know that." "Then I'm glad it's your feel and not mine," he shouted back, "because I'd have had us in Nebraska by now." It should not have been possible to laugh, freezing and half-blind in a Kansas blizzard with a murder warrant hanging over her head. But she did, a short startled bark of laughter torn away instantly by the wind, and something in her chest eased at the sound of it, at the sound of his answering laugh beside her. They lost the trail twice more before they found the Cimarron, its banks nearly indistinguishable from the drifted snow around them, saved only by the faint, muffled sound of moving water somewhere beneath the ice, and Lavinia followed that sound with a fierce, single-minded concentration that left no room for fear until the moment, an hour later, when Elijah's horse went suddenly, sickeningly down into a hidden gully hidden beneath a drift. And man and animal both disappeared from her side into the white. "Elijah!" She was off her own horse before she had fully thought to be, wading through snow to her thighs, following the rope line hand over hand until she found him, half buried, one leg pinned beneath his struggling horse, cursing steadily and with impressive creativity. "I'm not hurt," he managed between efforts to free his leg. "Horse is fine, just startled. Ground just dropped out from under us is all." Between the two of them, with Lavinia hauling on the horse's bridle and speaking low and steady to calm it while Elijah worked his leg free, they got the animal back onto solid footing and stood afterward in the howling dark, both of them breathing hard, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him even through the layers of ice-crusted wool between them. "You could have been killed," she said, and heard with some surprise how much her own voice shook. "So could you, wading into a blind gully after a fool marshal who should have watched his footing." He caught her hand before she could pull it back, held it a moment, his thumb brushing once, gently, over her frozen knuckles. "We are neither of us turning back now, Lavinia, not with that little girl waiting on us, but I want you to know, if it comes down to a choice between the medicine and you, I am choosing you every single time, and you needn't argue me out of it because I've already decided." She did not answer him in words. There was not time, and the wind would have stolen them anyway. But she held onto his hand a moment longer than was strictly necessary before they remounted, and rode the last 2 miles into Dodge City with that warmth held close against the cold, like an ember carried carefully through a storm. They reached Dr. Meacham's darkened office a little before 4 in the morning, hammered on his door until he came down in his nightshirt with a lamp and a look of pure astonishment, and explained, breathless and shaking, what had brought them through a blizzard that had closed every road in the county. "Diphtheria," Meacham said, already moving for his cabinet. "You did right to come, though the good Lord alone knows how you found the road in this. The serum needs care in the cold. It must not freeze solid or it's worthless. Wrap it against your body, under your coats, not in a saddlebag." He paused, looking at Lavinia more closely by lamplight, recognition dawning slow and uncomfortable across his face. "Miss Slater, there's a warrant out for you, you know. Whole town's talking of it." "I know it, doctor. I did not come here to hide from that warrant. I came because a 6-year-old girl is dying 22 miles from here, and I know the road, and Deputy Trask was willing to ride it with me. Whatever else you believe of me, believe that." Meacham studied her a long moment, then handed over the small glass vial, carefully wrapped in wool. "I believe a woman who'd ride into a blizzard for a stranger's child isn't much given to murder, Miss Slater, whatever Holly's Dunbar's sworn to. Get that girl her medicine, and get yourselves somewhere warm before you both catch your deaths doing it." The ride back was, if anything, worse than the ride out, for exhaustion had begun to work on both of them, and the storm showed no sign of relenting. But Lavinia carried the vial pressed against her own skin beneath 3 layers of wool exactly as instructed, and Elijah rode close beside her the whole way, and somewhere in the gray hour before dawn, with the worst of the wind finally beginning to slacken, they came at last upon the lights of the Whitfield homestead, and half fell rather than climbed down from their horses at the door. Nell Whitfield's throat had nearly closed by the time Dr. Meacham's serum reached her, administered with trembling hands by her own terrified mother under Lavinia's steady instruction, for there had been no time and no possibility of bringing the doctor himself through such a storm. It was nearly noon before the girl's breathing eased enough that her mother wept openly with relief, and it was not until then, sitting exhausted at the Whitfields' kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands, that Lavinia allowed herself, finally, to feel the full weight of what they had just done. "We might have died out there," she said quietly to Elijah, who sat across from her looking as wrung out as she felt, ice still melting slowly from his hair. "Both of us. For a family I only know from delivering their mail and their school primers. We might have," he agreed. "But we didn't, and that little girl's going to see spring because of it, and I find I don't regret a single frozen mile of it." He looked at her steadily. "You're not what Dunbar's warrant says you are, Lavinia. I knew it before, but I know it clean through now, in a way no piece of paper's ever going to talk me out of." She met his gaze and did not look away. "Thank you for riding beside me instead of behind me, Elijah Trask." Most men in your position would have marched me straight to Dunbar's jail and collected their reward without a second thought for what was true. Most men are fools, he said simply. I'd rather be the kind that's slow to judge and quick to ride, if it's all the same to you. Sarah Whitfield, still holding her sleeping daughter, glanced between the two of them with the particular knowing look of a woman who had seen young love before and recognized its early symptoms plainly enough. You two ought to rest here today before you think of riding anywhere else. There's a room in the loft, and no one to gossip but 6 children who will be asleep the moment their bellies are full. They took the offer, though separately, and it was that evening, with the worst of the blizzard finally spent and a clean bright cold settling over the plains, that they sat up together on watch by the Whitfield small barn, keeping an eye on a mare due to foal early and unwilling to wait for kinder weather, and talked, for the first time, of things that had nothing to do with warrants or evidence at all. You never asked how I came to this work, Lavinia said, watching her breath fog in the lantern light. Riding a book wagon alone across half of western Kansas. I figured you'd tell me if you wanted me to know. I had a brother, she said after a moment, Daniel. He went off to fight in the war when I was 12 years old and he was 17, and he wrote me letters the whole while, about the towns he passed through and the books men traded around camp at night to keep their minds off the killing. He never made it home. Shiloh took him, same as it took so many. But I kept every letter, and somewhere in the grief of it, I got the notion that a book, or a letter, or just a bit of news from beyond your own fence line, might be the one thing standing between a person out here in complete despair. So when the Ladies' Frontier Reading Society in Topeka put out the call for someone willing to ride the circuit, I answered it, though my mother thought I'd lost my senses entirely. You hadn't, Elijah said quietly. I've seen what it does for a family, having someone ride out just to bring them a newspaper and a novel and ask after their children by name. That's not a small thing, out here where the nearest neighbor might be 9 miles off. And you? She asked. What made a man choose a badge when it seems, from what I've watched these 2 days, to have cost you more sleep and more certainty than most professions would? He was quiet a long moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. I fought too, though I was younger than your brother when I started, 16 when I lied about my age and rode with a Kansas regiment the last 2 years of it. I saw enough of what men do to each other when there's no law at all to answer to, that I came home believing the law was the one thing standing between a decent people and complete ruin. I still believe that mostly. But I've learned this week, watching Holly's Dunbar twist a warrant to serve men with more cattle than conscience, that the law can be made to lie same as anybody else can, if the wrong hands are holding the pen. That's a harder thing to carry than I expected, 6 years in. And yet you didn't collect the reward, she said softly. You could have. Nobody would have blamed you, not with a sworn warrant behind you. I'd have blamed myself. He looked at her then, steady and open in a way that made her breath catch slightly. I don't want easy money, Lavinia. I want to be a man whose badge means something, and I find more than that even, that I don't much want to be anywhere you aren't these past 2 days. I don't rightly know what to call that yet, but I thought you ought to know it's there. She did not answer right away. The mare shifted in her stall, restless, and somewhere off in the dark a coyote called and was answered. When Lavinia finally spoke, her voice was careful but not unkind. I feel it too, Elijah. I have felt it since you came off that ridge, shooting straighter than any man I'd ever seen, and it has only grown since, riding beside you through that storm. But I am a wanted woman still, whatever either of us believes to be true, and I will not let whatever this is between us become the reason you lose your badge, or your good name, or worse, chasing a proof we haven't found yet. Let us finish this first. Let us clear my name honestly, in daylight, before we speak any further of what might come after. That's fair, he said, though something in his eyes told her the waiting would not be easy for either of them. But I want it understood plainly so there's no confusion between us going forward. Whatever comes of the warrant, Lavinia Slater, I'm not walking away from you when this is finished. I mean to see this through to the end, and then I mean to court you properly if you'll have me." She smiled then, the first full, unguarded smile she had allowed herself in days. "Ask me again once I'm not wanted for murder, Elijah Trask, and we shall see what my answer is." He leaned toward her, slow and unhurried, and she met him halfway, and their first kiss, there in the lantern light with a foaling mare shifting nearby and a blizzard's aftermath glittering white across the plains outside, was gentle and searching and entirely unlike anything either of them had expected to find in the middle of a manhunt that was, technically, still hunting one of them. They rode back toward the Boone Ranch the next morning with the sky scoured clean and blue overhead, and it was there, 3 days later, that the second piece of the puzzle came to them, riding in on a lathered horse in the shape of Amos Pruitt himself, the very driver whose testimony had helped condemn Lavinia in the first place, looking like a man who had not slept in a week and did not expect to sleep again soon. "I come to say I lied," he told them flatly, standing in Edith Boone's kitchen with his hat crushed between white-knuckled hands. "Dunbar paid me $40 and told me if I didn't say I seen Miss Slater passing papers to road agents, he'd see to it my brother's homestead claim got contested clean off the books, and I've got a wife and 4 children depending on that claim, and I did it, God forgive me, I did it for $40 and a scared conscience. But then I heard what you two did, riding into that blizzard for the Whitfield girl, and I could not carry the lie any further and sleep at night." Elijah's jaw had gone tight. "Would you swear that before the circuit judge, Pruitt, in writing before witnesses?" "I would. I mean to, whatever it costs me." "But there's more you ought to know, Marshal, and it's worse than my lie." Pruitt's voice dropped. "Dunbar didn't act alone in any of this. He's been in the pocket of Warwick Holloway and that Triple Bar Cattle Company since before Silas Boone ever turned up dead in that ravine. It was Holloway's men ambushed the stage, looking for that packet, and it's Holloway's money paying the reward on Miss Slater's head. I heard Dunbar and Holloway talking 3 nights back, in the back room of the Alamo Saloon, and Holloway said plain as anything that the woman needed to be found before that judge arrives, found and silence permanent, and Dunbar as good as agreed to see it done quiet, dressed up after as her resisting a lawful arrest." The kitchen went very still. Edith Boone's hand had gone white-knuckled around the coffee pot. "When does the judge arrive?" Lavinia asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "In town is Judge Norwood's circuit train gets delayed by the storm same as everything else, but he's expected within the week, riding the rail spur as far as it goes and then by wagon the rest," Pruitt said. "But Dunbar means to have you dealt with before then, Marshal. He don't know I've come out here. I aim to keep it that way till I can stand in front of that judge myself." Elijah was already moving, reaching for his coat. "Then we don't have a week to sit here proving things quiet and careful. We need Holloway's ledgers. We need whatever's left of the Boone papers. And we need it before Dunbar decides waiting isn't worth the risk." It was Lavinia who spoke next, and there was something new in her voice, a hard clarity that had not been there before, the sound of fear transforming, finally, into resolve. "I know where the Triple Bar keeps its brand book. I have delivered supplies to that ranch house myself, before I understood what I was looking at. Holloway keeps his true ledger in a strongbox in his study, separate from the false one he shows the stock inspectors. Silas found that much out before he died. Edith told me as much the very first night I came here. That's a fortified ranch house with a dozen hired guns on the payroll, Lavinia. We cannot simply ride in and ask to see the books." "No," she agreed. "But Holloway holds his winter roundup accounting in 3 days' time, when every hand on that ranch will be out working the herd, counting stock for the tally books, and the house itself will stand near empty but for Holloway and perhaps 1 or 2 men. I have seen the pattern of it for 2 winters running, delivering his wife's magazines and her mail order catalogs. If we are going in at all, that is the day to do it." Elijah looked at her for a long moment, something like pride and worry both moving across his face at once. "You've been planning this since Pruitt walked through that door, haven't you?" "I have been planning it," she said, "since Hollis Dunbar took that packet out of my satchel while I slept and called it justice." The roundup accounting fell on a bright, brutally cold morning 3 days later, with the last of the blizzard snow crusted hard and glittering across the range, and Elijah Trask and Lavinia Slater rode toward the Triple Bar Ranch house not as fugitive and hunter, but as two people who had, somewhere in the space of a blizzard and a kiss and a dying man's warning, become partners in the truest sense either of them had ever known. They left their horses tied in a stand of cottonwoods a half-mile out, and approached the house on foot through the crusted snow, moving low along the fence line exactly as Elijah had learned to do stalking Confederate pickets 15 years before, Lavinia matching his pace with a quiet competence that told him she had spent more of her girlhood hunting, and less of it embroidering than most women he had known. The ranch house stood mostly quiet, smoke rising thin from a single chimney, and through a side window they could see Warwick Holloway himself, a heavy, gray-whiskered man in a fine wool coat, seated at a desk with a strongbox open before him, working over papers with the particular satisfaction of a man who believes himself entirely beyond consequence. It was Elijah's plan to go in the front, badge showing, and demand the books under color of law, but Lavinia caught his arm before he could move. "He'll burn what he can and deny the rest the moment he sees that badge, Elijah. You know he will. We need to see what's in that strongbox before he knows we're here at all. And if he's armed, which he surely is, then you'll be right behind me, same as you were on that ridge above the stage road," she said. "I did not come this far to hide behind a fence and hope you manage it alone." There was a low side door, meant for house servants and rarely locked in a ranch this size and this remote, and it was through this that they slipped, quiet as they could manage, moving down a short hallway toward the study where Holloway sat working, entirely unaware. He looked up only when Elijah's shadow fell across his desk, and his hand went immediately for the drawer at his side, but Elijah was faster, his revolver already leveled. "I wouldn't, Mr. Holloway." "Deputy United States Marshal Elijah Trask, I'll have you keep both hands flat on that desk if you please." Holloway's face, for just a moment, showed genuine fear before it settled back into something colder and more calculating. "Trask, I know your name. Dunbar's man, aren't you, come to collect on the reward after all? I've come to see what's in that strongbox of yours. You've no warrant for my property, Marshal." "No," Lavinia said, stepping into view beside Elijah and watching Holloway's face go pale at the sight of her. "But I have seen the true brand book before, Mr. Holloway, torn pages of it, before your man stole them back from Marshal Dunbar's desk drawer. I know what running iron marks look like against an honest brand, and I expect that book right there tells the same story those torn pages did." For one terrible, suspended moment, Lavinia thought Holloway might simply reach for a weapon despite the gun leveled at him, might decide the risk worth taking rather than surrender the evidence of everything he had built. But then, slowly, something in the heavy set of his shoulders seemed to collapse, the bluster of a man who had never truly expected to be caught draining out of him all at once. "Silas Boone should have taken his money and kept his mouth shut," Holloway said bitterly. "I offered him a fair price for that land, more than fair, and he had to go digging through old bills of sale like some clerk with a grudge." "You had him killed," Elijah said, his voice very quiet and very hard. "I had nothing to do with any accident that befell that fool's horse." "But you know who did," Lavinia said. "And you know your man altered the testimony of a frightened driver. And you know Marshal Dunbar swore out a warrant for a woman's murder on evidence you both manufactured, to buy yourselves time before a circuit judge could see the truth of your ledgers. That is conspiracy to murder twice over, Mr. Holloway, and it will hang you same as any road agent, syndicate money or not." It was at that moment, with Holloway's composure fully broken and the true brand book lying open on the desk between them, undeniable, that the front door of the ranch house crashed open, and Hollis Dunbar himself strode in with 3 armed men at his back, having ridden out the moment word reached him, through some informant among Holloway's hands, that trespassers had been seen slipping toward the house. "Well now," Dunbar said, taking in the scene with a slow, ugly smile. "Deputy Trask and our missing fugitive, both caught red-handed inside a private residence. That simplifies things considerably." His hand rested on his own revolver. "I'll be taking that reward after all, Trask, seeing as you've saved me the trouble of hunting her down myself, and I expect you'll not be raising any complaint about it, given the position you're standing in right now." "There's a witness," Elijah said, not moving, his own gun still trained loosely on Holloway. "Amos Prute's given a written statement to a notary in Dodge City this very morning, Dunbar, naming you and Holloway both. You can shoot us here and now if you're fool enough, but it won't undo that statement, and it won't put that brand book back in the drawer where you thought it was safely hidden." Something flickered across Dunbar's face, the first genuine uncertainty either of them had seen in him. "Prute wouldn't dare." "He already has," Lavinia said, "and Judge Norwood's circuit train reaches Dodge City tomorrow, not next week as you'd hoped, delayed no longer than the rest of us by that storm. You have perhaps a day left to decide whether you'd rather answer for 2 murders as the man who tried to stop the truth reaching that judge, or as the man who, at the last, let it through." For a long, terrible moment, no one in that room moved, and Lavinia felt the whole weight of the standoff pressing down on her chest like a physical thing, aware with a clarity that frightened her exactly how close they all stood to violence that could not be undone. Then one of Dunbar's hired men, a young rider named Casey Milhouse who could not have been more than 20 and had, Lavinia would later learn, only taken Dunbar's coin because his family's homestead was mortgaged past hope, lowered his rifle slowly and said, in a voice that shook only slightly, "I ain't shooting a deputy marshal and a lady over cattle money, Marshal Dunbar. I never signed on for murder." It was enough. The other 2 men, seeing Milhouse waver, lowered their weapons in turn, and Dunbar, standing suddenly alone in his resolve, seemed to shrink, all his borrowed authority draining out of him at once. "This isn't finished," he said, but there was no conviction left in it. "No," Elijah agreed, moving forward to relieve him of his revolver. "It's finished tomorrow morning in front of Judge Norwood, where it should have been finished from the start." They rode into Dodge City the next day with Warwick Holloway and Hollis Dunbar both bound and sullen, escorted by Elijah Trask, Amos Prute, and riding proud and unafraid at Elijah's side, Lavinia Slater herself, the true brand ledger wrapped safe in oilcloth against her chest exactly where she had once carried Silas Boone's stolen papers. Judge Norwood, a lean, weathered man with a reputation for patience and very little tolerance for corruption of any stripe, heard the full accounting over the course of 2 long days. Amos Prute's sworn confession of his false testimony and Dunbar's bribe, Dr. Meacham's testimony as to the Blizzard crossing and Lavinia's character, Edith Boone's account of her husband's ledger discovery and death, and finally the brand book itself, laid open on the courtroom table, its altered marks plain as daylight to anyone who cared to look. The reward for Lavinia Slater's capture was formally withdrawn, and the warrant against her dismissed entirely, with Judge Norwood's own written statement that no further shadow of suspicion should attach to her name, and that the court owed her, if anything, its gratitude for uncovering a conspiracy that had already claimed 2 lives and stolen the livelihoods of a dozen small ranching families across the county. Hollis Dunbar was stripped of his badge and held over for territorial trial on charges of bribery, conspiracy, and complicity in murder. Warwick Holloway, facing the ruin of his cattle empire and the near certainty of a hangman's rope, once the full extent of his crimes came clear, chose, in the end, to name every man who had ever ridden for him and every rancher whose herds he had stolen, in a desperate bid for leniency that Judge Norwood granted only so far as to spare his neck and send him to territorial prison for the remainder of what would surely be a long and bitter sentence. Elijah Trask, for his part, tendered his resignation as Deputy United States Marshal the same week, not out of disgrace, but out of a clarity he had been building toward since the night Tom Rourke died, warning a woman not to trust the very law that was meant to protect her. "I mean to keep believing in the law," he told the new marshal appointed to replace Dunbar, a steady older man named Garrison who had ridden with the territorial court for a decade without a hint of corruption to his name. "But I find I'd rather build something of my own now, something I can watch grow honest from the ground up, than keep chasing after other men's crimes for a government paycheck. There's small ranchers all through this county who lost stock to Holloway's syndicate and never got a fair accounting of it. I mean to help see that righted, and I mean to do it as a private man, not a badge." Lavinia, when he told her this, sitting once more at Edith Boone's kitchen table with the whole terrible business finally behind them, only smiled and said, "You'll need somewhere to keep books, then, for all that writing of accounts. I happen to know a woman who's rather good at organizing exactly that sort of thing." Spring came early and generous to Ford County that year, the way it sometimes does after a hard winter, as though the land itself meant to make amends. By the time the first green haze of new grass crept across the range in April, Elijah Trask and Lavinia Slater had built, on 40 acres of good bottomland along a quiet bend of the Cimarron that Edith Boone had sold them at a fair and friendly price, a modest but sturdy house with a wide front room that served, in equal measure, as a way station for small ranchers seeking honest help untangling brand disputes and stolen herd claims, and as the westernmost outpost of the very same traveling library circuit Lavinia had ridden for 2 years before a blizzard and a stagecoach ambush changed the whole shape of her life. She still rode the circuit twice a month, though never alone now, for Elijah rode beside her as often as his own work allowed, carrying letters and newspapers and battered novels out to families who had, in the wake of the Holloway trial, come to think of Lavinia Slater's book wagon as something rather more than a simple convenience, a symbol, however small, that the law and the truth might, after all, sometimes ride the same road together if enough good people insisted on it. Amos Pruitt's family claim was upheld clear and clean, his testimony against Dunbar remembered generously rather than held against him, and Casey Millhouse, the young rider who had lowered his rifle at the crucial moment, found honest work on Elijah's growing venture rather than the noose his poor judgment might otherwise have earned him. It was on a warm evening in early May, with the last light going gold and soft over the new grass and Edith Boone come to visit for supper, that Elijah Trask finally asked the question he had been carrying, patient and certain, since a lantern-lit night in a Whitfield barn some 5 months before. "I promised you I'd ask again," he said, taking her hand across the porch railing as the sun went down. "Once you were no longer a wanted woman. I find I have been holding that promise very close, waiting on the right evening to keep it." Lavinia's heart was beating hard, though she already knew, with the same clear certainty with which she had once followed a frozen riverbank through a blizzard, exactly what her answer would be. "Ask, then, Elijah Trask." "Lavinia Slater, I have watched you fight for strangers with your own 2 hands, ride into a storm that should have killed us both, and stand steady in front of armed men without a tremor in your voice, and in all that time I have never once wanted to be anywhere in this world but beside you. I am not offering you convenience this time, nor a shield against any warrant, nor anything born of necessity at all. I am asking you, plain and honest in the daylight, exactly as you once said you'd want it, whether you will marry me and build the rest of whatever comes with me as my wife and my equal both." She did not make him wait for her answer. "Yes, Elijah, 1,000 times yes, and gladly." Edith Boone, watching from the doorway with a suspicious brightness in her eyes that she would later insist was only the wood smoke, allowed herself a single satisfied nod. "About time, the pair of you. I've had that spare room aired out and ready since the day I met you both." They married in June, in the same small church in Dodge City where Judge Norwood had once presided over a very different reckoning, with the Whitfield children scrubbed and solemn in the front pew, Nell Whitfield fully recovered, and grinning gap-toothed through the whole ceremony. And half the small ranchers of Ford County crowded in to see the woman who had once carried their county's justice on horseback through a blizzard finally find, in Elijah Trask, a partner worthy of riding beside her for whatever road still lay ahead. There was no reward collected that day, no bounty paid, only a marriage entered into freely in daylight, exactly as both of them had once insisted it must be, and a house waiting for them along the Cimarron where books and ledgers and letters and love had all, in their own strange and winding way, found room to grow together at last.